Hello and welcome to the CapEx Chat. We've talked before about how much we believe in what we do. We believe that we can create a lot of value for our customers, our clients. Normally, our clients are incorporated businesses. However, I think it is important to remember, why is it so that we work in companies with capital allocation, and the way we measure if we succeed in allocating capital in the best possible way is by looking at how much value we create for the shareholders. It's not a coincidence. Our societies, most of our societies in Western Europe, in the Americas, most of South America anyway, it is so that it is the shareholders that own the residual earnings of a company. They take a large part of the risk, but they are also the owners of the residual earnings.
It is a mechanism that has worked better than any other tried mechanisms.
I agree, and I also think it has something to do with the owners are the ones that provide the capital. Right?
Oh, definitely. And originally also sort of the idea.
The idea,
usually.
Not always, but usually. But the shareholders provide the capital. And lawmakers, since a long time ago, have identified that the allocation of capital is so important and so fundamental for the well-being of a nation. I'm not taking anything away, of course, from all the other things regarding social rights and law and order, democracy, free speech, right of or available healthcare and all of that. But still, that to make sure that the capital allocation works in a country is so fundamental for the opportunity to grow and
prosper as a country.
Grow and prosper and create more opportunities to actually eventually consume in a society.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the gross domestic product, the GNP, you can calculate that in different ways. But it's in one way, it's consumption and it's investment. So consumption, private and federal, governmental, state, and it's investments of private investments, corporate investments, government, state, federal, and so on. This is where we operate. We operate in the investment section of it. And what we have seen and what we have talked so much about and written so much about is that the views are not what they should be. The mindset is not what it should be. The way to calculate things is not what it should be when it comes to investments.
No, we work within the private sector. We work with large companies generally. But I firmly believe, almost say I know, that the exact same problems exist also on a governmental level.
Yeah, and we have, I mean, if you look back many years, we were involved in railroads, utilities and so on. So if you take roads, railroads, utilities, nations spend enormous of money in that. And if you add then to that the corporate investments, it's that.
We know how much we can improve a company's allocation of capital. Yes. We know that if they go from the traditional way of looking into allocations into a way that puts the strategy in front of the individual capex, we know that we can improve the capital allocation efficiency normally by more than 20%. But let's say that it's 10%. Mm-hmm. Let's say that we can improve it with 10%, or that most companies could improve it with 10%. You talked about GDP before, and over the last, I believe it's 20 or 40 years, the average investment level of USA has been 20%. So every year, out of the GDP in USA, 20% is in investments. 80% is all the consumption and all the government spending
and net
imports and net exports. But let's just make a thought process. If it was possible to improve the efficiency of an entire economies, such as US, capital allocation with 2 percentage points per year.
Yeah, that's 10% on investments.
Yeah,
that would improve the GDP by 2%, another 2%.
Yeah, so
per year.
20% of the GDP is investments. We can improve that with 10% every year. That will get to a 2 percentage points. Bear with us now. This calculation has its
flaws.
But if you could do a calculation like that, The average GDP growth of the US over the last 20 years would go from roughly 4% per annum to almost 6% per annum. And that would mean today that there would be a 10,000 billion, a 10 trillion more available every year in the American GDP. Available for consumption, available for healthcare, available for education, available for defense, or whatever is the American people think is best needed. Well, there's so many zeros. It's difficult even to. It's 10,000 billion USD per year. That's 50% of the GDP. Remember now, that's over a 20-year period.
Yeah, and I think that the US public could think of one or two things to do with that money. It's schools, improved roads, better health care.
And then, with that said, I do believe that the American economy, at least over a really long period of time, over the last 50 or 100 years, probably been pretty good at allocating capital compared to many other economies.
Yep.
But still, the potential is there.
So companies are really good at creating strategies. They create market strategies for customers, HR strategies, environmental strategies, for their technologies.
The more strategies, the better.
The more strategies, the better. So they create all of that, and they create these documents for that and say, okay, this is what we're going to do next year, the year after that, and so on. Okay, and then they look at their capital opportunities and they think, okay, so if this is our strategy, we're heading this direction with our company, what should the decisions be from a capital point of view? And then they sort of look at all these products, and
it's almost like letting the tail wag the dog.
Yeah, it sounds like that, doesn't it? Yeah. They then list all their project opportunities, and they look at the paybacks and, of course, what they have to do and so on to achieve then the strategy. But there's one enormous piece missing here. And what is that?
Well, it's the Capex strategy.
Exactly. So they have strategies for basically everything, but they do not have a strategy for their assets.
And you know, most of you that will listen to this, I think, what I'm almost about to say. And what is the most fundamental part of a company to start with?
Capital.
It's the capital. Capital is the reason why a company exists. It's because shareholder or other owners put in capital into a company and they want to return out of that. And so the strategy of allocating that capital, the Capex strategy, is, of course, should be fundamental and come before the other strategies.
Yeah. And I think that, there are a couple of reasons for why companies walk into this trap, because we've said it before, when you go to university, you read your marketing books, you take all these classes, you take corporate finance classes, you leave school thinking that this is how you should do it. And you you get your first job in an industry somewhere, and this is exactly how they do it. They create all these strategies, and they create all these CapEx projects and the capital budget and so on, and they just keep doing that. And they never thought that there is something that they need between all these other, more often more abstract strategies and their CapEx project that sort of bridges the two and asks the question, well, is our asset base actually fit? Is it in shape to actually fulfill the strategies or not? I remember so well, we did a project some years ago that had different regions, and the CEO, he had gone out and said, we're going to grow in every region. And if you looked at the asset base, the footprints in these regions, you could, after a while, we could see that, you could do that in some regions, but other regions were not fit. They were not in shape to actually grow. You could maintain or even shrink, but you could not grow. If you tried to grow...
Not profitably. So.
Exactly. If you tried to grow in those regions, you would lose money. You wouldn't actually be adding money, adding value. You would be losing value, losing money if you try to grow. And this is what we mean. You could have strategies about anything, but if you're not fit to actually fulfill your strategy, you're going to start losing money. Yeah. And that is what you need to confirm. And it's an iterative process. And you might have to change your overall strategy, or at least refine it a bit to be more specific, depending on what the response is from the asset base.
Yeah, and that is why a Capex strategy, the persons that are involved in creating such a strategy, they need to come from all walks of life within a company. Okay. It is engineering, it is controlling, it is marketing and sales.
Yes.
It is
raw material. Yes. It's all of
it's
that.
from an M&A and all of those. And they are all combined into the Capex strategy. That is the governing, yes. And it's both the start and the end product.
Yes. And it's important to, let's see, so I don't upset anybody here now, but...
Because we're worried about that, right?
Yeah, we are really, so much. A Capex strategy cannot be developed by strategy people only. They can participate and contribute. They could
drive the process.
Exactly, they could drive the process, but they cannot create the Capex strategy. That is impossible.
Yes.
We need a cross-functional team to actually do that part.
Yes. Not only do you find the best strategy then, you also create the best environment for actually executing the strategy after that.
Yeah.
I recently read some news in the papers that concerned me a lot. And when I started to put that into context, I could also remember that there had been, over the last few months, there had been numerous companies that I know of that had, and they have communicated similar things, and it concerns me a lot. Not only for those particular companies, but also for the economy in general. And that is, I've seen an increased occurrence of CFOs and CEOs that have communicated increased hurdle rates or increased targets regarding return on capital employed, return on operating capital. I haven't really seen EVA because I don't see much about EVA these days at all. But these types of book profitability increased targets.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and the issue is when you increase those hurdle rates or these sort of targets for profitability, the consequence is that you're going to start losing money if you achieve this. And let us explain why. If you have a weighted average cost of capital of, let's say, 10%, but you have a hurdle rate for your internal rate of return, or if you have a discounting rate that is higher than the 10%, thinking that, oh, that's a good way to sort of add a buffer into things, or that's a good way to make sure that we can easier pick the better products, you're actually doing the opposite. You're going to end up with worse products that make you lose money.
Yeah.
Because the good products for your company, the ones that will add value in the long term, they will not have a 15-20% return. They are lower than that.
I totally agree. And still, I think that communicating changes in hurdle rates I'm even more worried about when companies increase their target rates for example, return on capital employed.
Yeah, because
what is the easiest way for a company to achieve an increased return on capital employed the next 2 or 3?
By holding back on capexes and simply depreciate their asset base faster than their EBITDA decline, and then they're home.
Because there is one thing that return on capital employed correlates with more than anything else.
Age.
And that is age. It's a measure of age. So they are saying implicitly, we are going to age our assets.
Oh yeah,
that's what they're saying.
That's what I would do if I had my bonus based on return on capital.
The problem is also partly on the analytical side. I know that there are a lot of good analysts out there that react the way we do it when they see changes in ROCE targets, such as the one we're talking about. But I also believe that there are many out there that do not understand the consequences of changes in ROCE and even applauds it. And it's to the detriment of the companies and in the end, the entire economy, unfortunately. So for anyone out there, take note of the companies doing that. And if you're one of them, don't hesitate to reach out at any time. And we'll talk more about why we think it's a risk.
Okay, so Daniel, you and I, we meet a lot of companies in the industry, and all companies have, I wouldn't say companies, but I still do. All companies have ambitions, but actually it's the people in the companies that have ambitions. I mean, we are the same, aren't we? We have ambitions. So that's sort of connected a bit to what we have talked about in other talks that we've had, other Capex chats. But not all companies are equipped to actually handle initiatives.
No, and it's not only all companies, not all industries should grow.
Exactly. We have seen companies that are on declining markets that have fantastic opportunities to move into something else, to do something else. But then there are companies that don't have these opportunities, but they still seem to be of the opinion that it is their job, the leadership's job, to find something else for the company to do.
Yes, and that is because there is a misconception about a company, that the company has some kind of inherent value, and it does not.
No, and also that there's a misunderstanding when it comes to the life of a company, that the company should live forever. And there's nothing that says that. Who says that?
Companies live and companies die.
Yeah.
And it is so much better if they die under orderly circumstances, that it's a planned thing than a
planned exit.
A planned exit rather than a big crash.
Yeah. So if you have a company that is entirely, for instance, in newsprint, they make the paper for the newspapers, and that is a declining market. They could think of all kinds of ideas, moving into tissue, moving into packaging, moving into whatever.
And it's fine to evaluate those, because it could be so that the asset-based values, it could be so,
but that is unusual. And why would they succeed in tissue when it's so difficult to succeed in tissue, even if you're in tissue? Same with packaging, same with everything else. And I think it's just fine for these companies to say, okay, we are really good at making newsprint. That the market is declining. We have really not found any great ways of converting ourselves into doing something else. So we'll simply earn our money, pay out dividends, and when the last mill goes down, we go down as a company.
Yeah. And during that time, provide the owners with a lot of money that they will take and put into somewhere else in the economy, creating new jobs, new opportunities, new tax money, new dividends for their owners, etc.
And the example I had would, in many cases, maybe even most cases, be the most valuable thing that leadership could do.
Yes, and it is the responsibility of the leadership, of course, but also we must not forget the board and the owners. It is the responsibility of the board and the owners of having the right people in the right place.
Yeah.
If you cannot put a wild horse creative mind into taking care of the final decade of a company.
And I know this from having sort of seen it, is that it's sometimes the board that is the problem, because they tell the CEO basically, you have to find another opportunity for your assets. These mills, we cannot take these mills down because they're worth so much. The equipment is a goal. You have to find something else.
And that's what I mean. It's a failure of the board and the owners.
Yeah. All right. So to one of the more
to one of your
terms.
babies.
Well, one of my babies. Yeah. The term capital intensive. What does that really mean? I mean, I think we can all agree that, of course, we would all understand each other if we talked in terms of the steel industry being capital intensive, or chemical industry being capital intensive, or pulp and paper being capital intensive. And then we would think that, okay, so a tissue converting plant, or even a recycle-based tissue paper machine, or a lumber mill, sawmill, they are less capital intensive. That is how we all talk. But what do we really mean by that?
Intensive compared to what?
Exactly. So if we talk about CapExes in relation to sales, then we can see that, sales of a steel mill is here and we invest that much. In tissue is that much of sales value and we invest that much. So steel is more capital intensive than tissue. But if we look at it from another perspective, which is, okay, so how much money out of the cash that we generate can we spend on capital? Then I claim that industries are, on average, they have the same capital intensity.
And that comes back to the assumption or the precondition, the definition that the average profitability expected would be 1.0 on the capital.
Exactly. That you return a net present value of 0 over time, which is not true in reality. I mean, but if we just are a bit theoretical for a while, because if you look at then the steel, you might have this much EBITDA, and how much of that will go into CapExes? Well, maybe that much. And then you look at tissue or lumber, a lumber mill, and you say, okay, we have that much EBITDA, and out of that, we're going to spend that much capital. It's the same. The relationships are the same. Over time, they are. We have actually...
If you're at 1.0.
Yes.
And similar life.
And 1.0 is how much money you make in relation to your capital over time, over life cycle, which gives you then net present value of 0, just to explain to our listeners. We have seen in our projects, we were a bit surprised first that when we did our projects in what is traditionally perceived as being capital intensive, they were like here in their performance when it comes to capital, and we could take them to that level. That are perceived as being less capital intensive, they were here, and we took them to that level. And it's not that actually they had better opportunities or so. They were simply worse at dealing with their capital. Yeah. They neglected it, basically, compared to steel, compared to pulp and paper.
And I think it's a question of low expectations.
Yes.
Because if you're in a capital-intensive industry, you are supposed to be able to handle your capital relatively efficiently.
And you staffed to take care of that.
While if you are into something more heavy on brands and other things, well, more of your focus goes somewhere else, and you pay less attention to your capital and your mills and your sites. And
so when you pay less attention to something over 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to be worse off. So if you neglect your capital for 10, 15 years, thinking that you're not capital intensive, other things are more important, you have lost a lot of money.
Yeah, and it could be so that some industries could learn a lot. Some of the more capital-intensive industries, which I believe is true, could learn a lot when it comes to branding and all of these things from other, potentially. I know it's difficult when we're talking about commodities or so, but still potentially from other industries, while the less capital-intensive probably have a lot to learn from companies with experience from capital-intensive industries.
Clearly. Right, so we discuss our views on CapExes in mills, in plants, often with companies, with leaderships. We talk about that they possibly spend too much money, too much capital into their old assets and so on. And then sometimes we get the comment, no, we wouldn't do that. We make sure that we spend our capital in our more competitive locations.
Sometimes we hear that they've classified their mills into cash mills or development mills or something similar.
I mean, that's fine. I think that is great as a mindset. I think they then avoid some of the more obvious pitfalls when it comes to capital allocation. But that is just what it is. It is a mindset. A mindset is not a plan. Okay, so you have the mindset, great mindset. Oh, okay. But that isn't it's not a code. The mindset doesn't create a plan. You need still to make a plan. And the plan is not, let's not spend money in our old assets. That is simply not a plan. It's a good mindset. It's not great, but it's a good mindset compared to ignoring the issue. But still, you need a plan.
And in reality, we also see that once a mill or a site is classified as a cash site, generally it's way too late.
It is too late, exactly.
It's way too late. It should be understood the life cycle of a mill or a machine or a plant in decades.
Yeah.
When we talk about steel, pulp, paper, utilities and things like that.
Yes. So when we hear this, we don't invest in the older assets. It's a fantastic mindset. Well, it's a good mindset. But the companies still need a plan. And a plan can only be created if they have a process and a tool where they can evaluate their various options in a codified way.
And the real problem usually is not at the very end of mills or machines' lives. It is when they are, if we should talk age as a percentage, maybe 60 to 80% old, 80-85% old. That's when you could hit the real pitfalls, the really damaging pitfalls.
Yep.
Well, first of all, by law, in most of the countries that we operate, an incorporated company is obliged to work in the interest of the shareholders, to give them a return on their capital. But there are a lot of other laws that apply also, such as labor laws, environmental laws, and all these kinds of things. And it has, for some reason, shareholder value has been connected to some individuals and some activism that seems to have tried to exploit or disregard certain rules that apply to them. And I think it's a shame. It's just tarnished a word that so much that a lot of companies in the United States, for example, do no longer want to use the word shareholder value, despite, if you read it into the details, they are still, of course, working for shareholder value.
Of course. And I think that it's not companies, investors, owners, or anything actually that has changed over the last, let's say, 20 years. So when companies 20 years ago talked about that the shareholder was the most important stakeholder, and now the same company says, no, we need to think about societies that we operate within. We need to think about environment and so on. And they have to do that, and they should do that. They should do it even more. But it's still that the shareholder is the most important stakeholder in their mind, because
from a company's point of view,
not
necessarily from them as persons and all that, but from a company's point of view.
Exactly. But what has happened is that you have to fulfill so many other items in society and the world that you operate in to be able to deliver shareholder value.
Yeah. And not all of them are by law or anything. It's simply because there is so much pressure. And in many cases, it's a good thing.
Yes.
It's a very good thing.
And companies, what I'm trying to say is that nothing has changed really when it comes to their focus on the shareholders being the most important stakeholder.
And I think the most important, nothing has changed regarding the law. The law is straightforward when it comes to incorporated companies, what the main stakeholder is from a financial point of view. And also, I would like to refer to a Capex Chat that we published, I think maybe a few weeks ago, when we talked about why do societies allow the shareholders to be the receivers of the financial rent. It is because societies think that's the best way to make sure that capital is allocated in a reasonable manner. And nothing from that has been taken out.
That's not going to end.
In 2019, a group of American executives published a statement where they said that, shareholder value still remains important, but it's no longer the top priority, or they thought that it should no longer be the top priority of companies, but rather a priority among many others, such as, of course, employees, environment, customers, and others. All good, all fine. We know that by law it's a slightly different way that they should look at it. But I also find one thing very interesting, and it is that they are executives of these companies. They are not the owners. These people that stated these has always been looking at companies from a corporate side. They have no intrinsic interest of creating shareholder value because they are not the ones that own the companies. And in a way, they have no saying in stating this at all. If someone should state it, there are two potential partners that could state anything about the priority of shareholder value or not. It is the owners and the law. They are the stakeholders when it comes to this.
Yeah, because it is interesting, because you have these CEOs who are being brought in by the board. And the board are being represented by the owners and who own the company, have invested in this company. And these people, the manager, the person who's there to manage the company says, no, I'm not here any longer to have focus on the shareholder, for the shareholders to be the primary stakeholder in the company. Now I have decided that is somebody else. And that, I think, is
not within that person's jurisdiction at all. Tariffs. It's been a topic that has been debated always, I guess, but even more so over the last few years when free trade has been under...
There's been limitations.
There's been limitations to free trade. Some tariffs has been entering our global economy that were not there a couple of years ago. and sometimes with merits and sometimes without merits. But what are the dangers of introducing tariffs to an economy? Well, I can see many.
Yeah, me too. And we should point out again, and you said that already, is that we are not experts in understanding if the tariff is fair, relevant, and so on. That is actually not what we're debating. No. But if a nation imposes tariffs on trade, one of the risks is that the competitiveness of the industry, of that nation's industry, will be perceived as being better than or stronger than it may actually be.
It's simple. It's you put evolution out of play, and the strongest will no longer survive, or rather, too many weak competitors will survive, and the entire industry will over time be significantly weakened.
Exactly.
We see it continuously.
So short term, there may not be much of an effect. There might be a good effect short term, but long term,
good effect for who?
Sorry?
Good effect for who?
For the company enjoying higher pricing from borders being shut down, basically, for the trade. Their customers will suffer because prices will go up. But for that industry that we're talking about, enjoying the tariffs, enjoying higher prices for their products that they're selling, they will benefit for a short time. But long term, they will lose from having had the tariffs. So there is no question.
Including tariffs, the way I understand it and the way I've seen it practically, it can only work if you have a plan to actually remove them also. If you need to protect something for some time to gain some kind of traction or to avoid some destructive competitiveness that you don't think is fair for someone else, that it might have merit. I don't know. But if it's kept over time and you don't know what or when would make it go away, it will weaken the industries.
Yeah.
And what we've also seen when we've been working in countries and in industry that we've seen this kind of protection is that it's not the workers that benefit, it's not the consumers, it's not the customers that benefit. The only one that potentially benefit is, you could say that's all right, is the shareholder.
In the company that benefits from high prices due to the tariff.
Yeah, especially if you have an owner that understands to use this tariff by continue to reinvesting and strengthening their position.
Longer term, what you're going to have in a nation, and long term, let's say more than 3 years, just say something. What you will have is a nation that is being more populated with older and less competitive assets than it would have had, not being able to move on as a nation, not being able to be competitive as a nation. And instead, you leave it to the politicians to decide how the capital should be allocated in the nation. And maybe that's fine with roads and railroads and utilities, but that is not good for the industry. So, Daniel, CapEx management and capital budgeting.
CapEx management. We, you and I probably feel most at home talking about Capex strategy, what can go wrong in capital allocation, what kind of overview that is needed in order to allocate capital in the best possible way. But we also have the more day-to-day process of executing a Capex strategy. You need to have tools and processes to handle requests, approval routes, follow-up. You need to have a way of handling the yearly or maybe several years capital budgeting, what should be included or not in each year's Capex. What could be expected? What should be required from a tool like that if someone looks into that?
I think it should be, from the corporation point of view, the company who has these processes ongoing all the time, it should be low maintenance. You should not have to have people operating the process or tools or documentation and so on. That should be all automated. Not only to cut out costs, but also to lower risks and make it faster, make it more efficient. It should, of course, lower risks in the sense that calculation models should be very difficult to alterate, and mess up. The version handling should be automized, completely automized. Because as we all know, it can take a couple of years or even longer before a request actually is being decided upon. And it goes back and forth in the chain of command and all the people involved if it's a large project. And there's a lot of versions that are being floated around, and that needs to be dealt with automatically.
We've been looking into different companies, how they do it. We're looking into different companies offering solutions. And I think we've seen, well, the most common way of handling the CapEx process and handling the budget process is to use in-house built tools and processes, often using Excel and SharePoint or some other things. But we also see a number of companies that already have a tool. They already have some process tool that they offer to companies, and now they are redesigning that a little bit, and they're offering it to companies to handle the CapEx routing, for example. What do you think about that, and what can be added to that, and in what way would you say that Weiser differs?
There's one thing that comes to my mind, and now it sounds like I'm completely changing the subject, but I don't think I am. My grandmother, she was very special in many ways. And her first car, it wasn't a brand. It was something, and this was apparently kind of common if you go back like 100 years approximately, that you picked pieces and you built the car yourself. You had somebody build the car for you. And it wasn't a purpose made, it wasn't a brand.
You bought an engine and a chassis and a steering wheel,
gearbox, and you bought the windshield and from somebody, and the mirrors if you even had them, and you pick like that. Okay, here, and this is how the CapEx management process works. Do you think the CapEx process and the CapEx tools will look like that 25 years from now?
Obviously
no
not.
way. No way. That's simply not how it's going to be. They are going to be purpose-made tools exactly for that purpose, being made hopefully by people who know what they're doing when it comes to CapExes. I don't think people understand how good a CapEx management process can be, how automated it can be, how low maintenance it can be.
And what are the end benefits then?
Let's say 3. Lowered cost by having lowered maintenance, but who knows? Maybe you won't. Maybe you actually won't fire those people. They're still going to be there doing something else. But lowered costs, there will be less frustration in the organization. You'll easily find an old CapEx request because it's in the system. You can search; it's free text search. You can find things. Version handling is there, so a lot less frustration. But the most important piece is that your decisions will be hopefully quicker and better.
Better informed in many ways, not only from the process up until it, but also given what you can find regarding historical decisions and how it's incorporated into the entire capital budgeting process.
Yes. So then hopefully better net present values. I mean, that's what we're all striving for when it comes to all of this. And again, I don't think companies understand how good they can be. You need to take the CapEx management and capital budgeting processes from where you are today and advance it to another level. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think it's so that many people who participate, who are now responsible for these processes, they don't have the vision simply.
No,
they don't see this.
And they don't necessarily quite understand the losses. And because we've not done all of the individual math on how much you could save on time and all of that. We've done that on a number of projects, of course, but on a much larger study, there is a well-reputed worldwide old consultancy that many of you know, and they estimate just by getting everything in order, digitizing it, having a connection between the individual CapEx process, the capital budgeting, and to some degree also the strategy, you could easily achieve an effectiveness improvement of 7 to 10 percentage points, which is a lot of money.
Yeah. And from that point, it will continue to improve, because if you buy a custom-made tool, us as a company, we're a small company, we have 15 developers and testers on our tool. That keeps improving every day, basically. Now, I have 2 questions for companies who have their own tool or tools that are not covering the entire process. One is, why would you not automate? Why would you not acquire a web-based tool that digitizes your CapEx management process, your budgeting process? Why would you not do that? And the second one is, who would you buy such a tool from? Would you buy it from a company who wouldn't find a CapEx request, even if it was in front of them? And they've never seen one. Or from CapEx experts. Who would you buy a tool from? Who would you like to provide you with those type of functions?
Yeah, I would like to expand on that. And the CapEx experts, that's one thing, but that's a small part. It's the capital allocation part. It's the entire. It's from the individual CapEx to the capital budgeting to the CapEx strategy.
Yes.
If you liked what you heard us talk about today and want to hear more about similar topics, don't forget to click subscribe or follow below.
And if you liked what you heard today, press like.